Hi guys, Web of this side, and in this video I want to share with you how to control your mind and really understand your own mental process and really use our mind rather than being used by the mind. And this is something that I have learned and implemented in my life, and what I have realized is that by far this is the most powerful way of controlling your mind. And although there are other tools like watching your breath and doing the meditation, but still all these things, they only work at the surface level and not treating the source of the problem. And my goal with this video is to tackle the problem from the source. So please stick around to the very end of this video, as I will be sharing with you a profound yet a very simple principle that has helped me to be more conscious and consciously using the mind rather than being unconsciously subjected to all of this, right? So with that, let's get started. So today I want to talk about how to control your mind and why we really want to control it, why there is need to control your mind. So if you have watched my previous video, you know that our thoughts and our emotions, they have the power to influence our reality. What we are seeing in the external world is only the reflection of our internal world. If you are consistently thinking all these negative thoughts, these disempowering thoughts, and feel the corresponding negative emotions that are attached to them, then it start to influence your reality in a negative way. And that's why it become very crucial to control your thought process and nurture the thought that help you to move forward with your life rather than being subjected to all this unconscious thought pattern and being stuck in a groundhog day, right? But the biggest problem in doing so, easier said than done. So the biggest problem is that we don't have the conscious control over our mind, and it moves us like a puppet. And all these thoughts, all these emotions, they start to move us in a direction that we don't want them to. So the goal of this video is to help you to get in control of your thought process, control over your internal world, so that you are no longer being haunted by what you don't want to experience, rather than get into this full control of what you do want to experience. So the question that comes is that why this thought really bothers us. So think of it this way. When we get a thought, like if I get a thought that my videos are bad, when I get this thought, now I can't stay still, right? Now I have to do something about it. So I start to either resist this thought, I try to ignore it by distracting myself, or I say to myself that, oh no, this is not true. Why am I thinking about this? I shouldn't feel this way. Or I start to get controlled by this thought. I start to see my YouTube analytics. I'm like, I'm not getting any views. No one likes to watch my video. It means my videos are bad. Then I start to see what others are doing, and I'm like, maybe I should talk about this topic, or maybe I should talk about that topic. And this takes me to this cycle of being overwhelmed and frustrated and being controlled by this thought. And all this happens because of this one single thought. The moment it arises, it starts to run me and make me do all these things because of me being unconscious. And by the way, more often than not, when these thoughts arise, they are the unconscious. You didn't choose them. That's why they are not yours, right? You are not consciously choosing them. If you are consciously choosing to think a thought, then an argument can be made that this is your thought. But most of the time, they are the unconscious thought. But what happens is that because I am thinking this thought, I start to take ownership of this thought. Because we get unconsciously identified with this thought, now we can't, stay with it. And what we don't understand is that just because I have this thought, it doesn't mean that it's mine. These are the programs that are running in your mind that comes from some external source. You pick them from either society, from media, or from like other people's opinion, and then we charge them with our emotion and mentalize them. We unconsciously internalize them and run them in our mind over and over again to a point that they become unconscious part of us. And then we start to think that They are our thoughts. This thought is me. This is my doing. When I get the thought that my videos are bad, I start to take ownership of it, and then I have to do something about it. There is no separation between me and my thought. You see what I mean? So when I resist this thought or try to ignore it by distracting myself by watching TV or browsing through social media, I have just temporarily gotten rid of it. This thought will come back and it will haunt me later when it is even more stronger. Because when you resist the thought, you give it the energy. Whatever you resist, it persists. Or if you get controlled by this thought, then you are just the puppet of your own mind. It can pull you and move you as per its way. Now, why do we really get affected by the thought? So think of it this way. Would you be bothered by a thought if it doesn't evoke any feeling within you? Or if it doesn't force you to feel a certain way? If it doesn't create any bodily response in the form of emotions, then are you really going to be bothered about it? When a thought arises and it evokes a certain emotion, kind of like, so we have thoughts in our mind and we have the emotion or feelings in our body, right? When the feeling and the thoughts, they comes together, it start to take the life of its own. Thought is kind of like this masculine energy and feeling is more of the feminine aspect of it. When masculine and feminine comes together, creation happens. This is when these thoughts start to take the life of its own, and this is when it start to affect you. So the problem is not the thought. Trust me, you can never stop the mind from having a thought. It's futile. I have tried it, because this is the nature of the mind. Without the thought, there is no mind. So you cannot stop your mind from thinking a thought, but what you can do is you can start dissolving this identification with the thought. So the biggest problem, the real problem when controlling your mind is that we get identified with the thought. And then this thought start to control us. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, it's kind of like this. You have the good thoughts and you have the bad thoughts. So, thought just arise like a wave. So, one day you feel good and the other day you feel bad. Then you feel good again, right? The problem is not that you have a bad thought and the feelings. The problem is your attachment to it. You are accustomed to feel good. You have this identification to feeling good. That's why when a bad thought or bad feeling occurs, you want to get rid of it, right? So to understand it from other perspective, think of it this way. Whatever comes after the I am is the ego, is the attachment, right? So if I have the thought that I am bad at making videos, it means I have this attachment to making good videos. That's why I want to resist this thought that my videos are bad. Or if I am saying that I am feeling bad, it means I am attached to feeling good, and that's why feeling bad doesn't sit well with me. You see what I mean? If you have a thought that I am rich, means you have this identification with the money that you have. You have this attachment with the money, and that's why the thought of losing the money causes you pain. This thought doesn't sit well with your ego, and that's why it bothers you and you try to get rid of it. So all these thoughts that bothers us are usually directed toward the ego, and that's why we can't stay still with them. If there is no identification, then it doesn't matter what thought arises, good or bad. You just let it arise and let it pass. It's kind of like, when a child is born, when you see a child is born with this pure sense of awareness of his existence. There is no language, there is no thought, because he doesn't know any language. So, how he will communicate in the mind via thoughts. What he has is just the joy of his presence. A child is naturally happy and joyous. There is no ego, there is no, I am this, I am that, right? There is only this pure sense of awareness of I am. That's it. A child cries only when he is hungry out of these bodily needs, but when he gets the food, he is happy again, right? But as the child grows up and all these impressions from the surrounding, all this identification of I am good, I am bad, I want this, I want that, now this state of pure awareness of self start to get polluted and clouded. Because if you see what really thoughts are, they are the residues of the impression of the world. If a child never sees and know what a toy is, he's never going to bother and ask for it. But because he has seen a toy and the residues of the impression are left in the mind, now he wants the toy to play with. Now he wants the good grades. Now he wants a high paying job and a house and a bigger salary than his friends and neighbors. And then we create all of these attachments and identification to satisfy our ego. And later when we realize all these things, they are not giving us the level of joy and happiness that we expected and wanted, then we spend the rest of our life on the journey to getting back to this natural state of self that we were born with, right? So a child is born with this clean slate, and then the whole journey of life becomes to find joy and peace again, this continuous effort to erase the slate and get back to that clean slate again. All life is spent to uncover this natural state of self, and this is what we call enlightenment. All the spiritual teachings are based on this journey of finding yourself, really peeling off all these different layers of identification and getting back to this realization of the self, this state of pure consciousness, right? And I'm not saying that one should not go for money and success in their life. One should definitely go for that. But the moment these things become the extension of your identity and extension of the self, then it becomes the problem. That's why you see famous celebrities who are on the downward spiral in their career. They are being depressed and using drugs, and some even take their own life, because this fame has become the extension of their self, of their identity. And when this fame isn't there, this attachment with it causes them all the pain and the suffering in their life. The whole purpose of spirituality is to function in this material world with the realization of who you are, your true self, and not make these materialistic things cloud your true nature and not being attached to them, right? So the question that comes is that how we can destroy this identification and the attachments with the thought and really access this state of pure awareness and this sense of self without the ego, without being affected by the thought. And that is what I'm going to share with you next. So this is something that I have learned from the book called Who Am I by Ramana Maharshi, and this process is called the meditation of the self. And don't worry, you don't have to sit to do this meditation. Rather, the goal of this exercise is to turn your whole life into a walking meditation. So we have this mind, right? Or let's call it ego. When a thought arises, let's say a thought arises that I am bad at making videos, and this thought is always accompanied by the feeling, let's say feeling of anxiety, feeling of doubts, feeling of fear, this thought, this is directed toward the ego. That's why it evokes all these bodily reaction like feeling and emotions, right? And then it starts to pull us like a puppet by a string. What we need to do is to destroy this thought from the source. Rather than taking the ownership of this thought, we have to create this separation between the self and the thought. When you look at the thought rather than looking as the thought, now you start to create this separation. Now you start to look at the thought as a second person. If you want to dissolve this identification with the thoughts, with the feelings, rather than the mind and the thoughts and feeling getting identified with the ego, we have to point it back to the self. Right? And how do we do that? Is just by asking a very, very simple question. And the question is, to whom does this thought arises? To whom does this thought arises? Who is thinking this thought? And not just ask this question, but really get into the full realization of it. It's one thing intellectually, understanding this, but it's another thing really asking yourself, like, who does this? Whom does this thought arise? Because when you do that, what happens is now you are no longer identified with it. You see the thought and the self as separate. All the thoughts that arises comes from the mind. What is the mind? There is no mind without the thought. There is only the self, the higher self. When you ask this question, now you can redirect the attention of the thought back at the self. Now you are dealing with the problem at the source. Because right now your self and your mind, they are superimposed, right? There is no separation between them. But when you ask this question, now this separation occurs. So think of it this way. Your mind is not the same as it was 5 years ago. Now you have different level of intellect, different thoughts than you had 5 years ago. But there was something, that was experiencing everything even then. That experiencer doesn't change. Who is it that was watching this thought? Who is it that was feeling the emotions? That experiencer was still there when you was child. It simply never changed. Your mind changed, your body changes, but there was something who was watching these thoughts, who was watching the body, who was experiencing the world. It was even there when you were a child, it was even there 5 years ago, it is even there right now. What is it? That's the self. That's the awareness. And goal is to get back to this source, get back to the self. When you ask this question, rather than the thought being directed to the ego, now you redirect it back to the self. To whom does this thought occurs? Thought goes back to the self. Who thinks this? Back at the self. And don't try to answer the question, try to realize the question. Goal is to get to this realization of the self. Don't let your mind interrupt with some intellectual answer like, the mind can say that, I think this thought. So the follow-up question should be, who am I? Who am I? What is the answer to this question? There is no answer. There is only this realization of the self. Like, who am I? You dissolve the identification. Who thinks this? Disidentify. The purpose of this exercise is to return to the source, return to the realization of the self. When you continue to inquire within yourself, you start to peel off all these different layers of the identification and you start to move inward and return to the self. That's the beginning of the self-realization. Once you get to this state, these thoughts, these feelings, none of this affect you. You become so detached that nothing really affects your internal state. You become untouchable. You become unfazed. You just do what needs to be done and that's it. in all the ancient scripture, if you look for the enlightenment, this is the only path that they have suggested. The enlightened people, if you look up to them, they have reached to such a height with this that they are no longer even identified with their body and mind. It doesn't mean that they don't have the thought or they don't have the feeling, but now these thoughts and these feelings no longer affect them because all the identification has been dissolved. They just see the thought just as it is. A thought comes and go, and they simply don't get entangled with them. So just a simple set of question. Whenever a thought arises and it starts to bother you, you simply ask yourself, to whom does this thought arise? And don't try to answer the question, try to realize the question. Answer and question, they both are the same. Who is thinking this thought? To whom does this thought occurs? Who am I? At one point, what will happen is that all these thoughts, they just start to get dissolved. And that's when this self-realization occurs. When you ask this, when you ask, to whom does this thought arise? When you ask, who am I? You will realize a pause within you, a silence within you. When there is this separation between the mind and body and the sense of this pure self. This is the goal, resting in that moment of silence. That is where your liberation lies, resting as the pure awareness, right? And with that, I am concluding this video. Leave me a comment down below to let me know if that was useful or if you have anything to ask. I will be more than happy to answer them. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, much love and peace.